Okay. Hello, everyone. A warm welcome to all of you in the virtual Sorensen Center for International Peace and Justice. Before we begin, the Sorensen Center at CUNY Law School, located on ancestral Lenape and Canarsie homelands, recognizes the long-standing significance of these lands for Indigenous peoples past and present. We believe that historical awareness of Indigenous exclusion and erasure is critically important and are committed to working to overcome their effects in our own educational institutions. It's terrific to see so many of you here. We have a great group of students, alums, fellows, more even coming in as I speak, advisory board members, friends, some new friends, partner organizations. I see Global Kids represented here. And a special welcome to Gillian Sorensen, Ted Sorensen's widow, our honorary advisory board chair, who's had a long and distinguished career with the United Nations. So glad you're here, Gillian. And I see others who've been instrumental with the Sorensen Center since inception. We have Steve Rosenfeld joining us, a former fellow at Paul Weiss of Ted Sorensen's, who has had leadership roles at CUNY Law for many years. And it's wonderful to see you, Jennifer Dorn, an amazing global health leader at Columbia University, and Haywood Burns' widow, who was the second dean at CUNY School of Law, and I was fortunate to be dean when I was at CUNY. Thank you so much for joining. We have some faculty advisors. We have Shamtoli Huck, labor law expert, and Cindy Suhu, who is co-director of our Gender Justice Clinic, and many others. So this is wonderful. Thank you all for joining. I'm Camille Massey. I'm founding executive director of the Sorensen Center at CUNY Law, the first named center. And this is our first Critical Voices series of the semester. I will say, if there was ever an appropriate, fantastic scholar in residence for these times at the Sorensen Center and at CUNY Law, it is Wolfgang Kaleck. Wolfgang, a strategic litigator, the founder and Secretary General of the European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights, and a very deep thinker. So welcome, Wolfgang, and good afternoon in Berlin.
Hello, Camille, and hello, everybody. I'm looking forward to meet this group in person at some point, and I hope this is happening soon.
Wonderful. Yes, this concept of scholar in residence has taken on a whole new meaning, but we're so grateful that you have been joining us consistently, and in fact joined us with your client Edward Snowden at the beginning of last academic year. And we are fortunate to have you now. You've been busy since you came and then had to quickly depart in March of 2000. You've been at the European Court and the Koblenz Court. You've been representing plaintiffs from Yemen and Syria and doing so much important work, and found time to write another book. The name of this book, I'm going to try to get it right. I don't yet have a copy because it's only been printed in German. And the name of your book is Die konkrete Utopie der Menschenrechte. How'd I do?
Der Menschenrechte, the concrete utopia of human rights, a look back to the future.
A look back to the future, and we hope that it will soon be published in English. But fortunately for all of us here, we get a chance to hear from you directly today. We're here with you now, and we reconnect with so much heavy news weighing on us all, from Afghanistan, from Haiti, the pandemic. I mean, just devastating climate change effects around the world. And I think you know us well enough now by spending time with us that we are ready to work and give as much as we can for our clients and to embrace an anti-racist, feminist, anti-colonial thought and advocacy. But these are tough times. And so I hope that what you can lead off by doing is telling us why now? Why are you coming forward with this very bold approach, this expansion to concrete utopia?
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me and for again having the honor to talk to you and to discuss with you. And I mean, it's serious that I'm looking forward to meet you in person and deepen the conversation. Actually, the idea of the concrete utopia of human rights is not something which came up to my mind last year when I wrote the book. But it was something I was already, it was already in my mind, as well as the idea to try to frame our work. And when I say our work, obviously it's the work of my organization, the European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights, an organization which litigates worldwide, let's say, torture cases like the Syrian torture case you just mentioned, two Syrian torturers on trial in the West German courts in Koblenz. But also, I mean, next week we're having the 20th anniversary of 9/11. We're still trying to enforce accountability for the U.S. torturers. So it's also a very important part of our DNA to demand accountability for the powerful of the world, and obviously the most powerful are the ones in your country. But we are also doing a lot on first of all to bring to knowledge that corporations can also be brought to court for their involvement in human rights violation, and even structural human rights violations like the continuing exploitation of workers in the textile industry in South Asia can be somehow brought to court, or at least give us a chance to make the point that this is an ongoing structural human rights violation. And even if we're not equipped now when it comes to the law to bring this exploitation to any court, but some of the court hearings at least allow us to connect the individual case we're litigating with a broader and systemic injustice. So yeah, we can also talk about our work on migration, the pushbacks and other human rights violation at European externals, and even more and more in the internal borders. And I refer to Croatia, the Croatian-Bosnian border. But also a relatively new field of our work, trying to bring together lawyers and organizations who try to make the best to bring even colonial crimes to European courts. In our case, the genocide against the Herero and Nama people in nowadays Namibia. So that's what we're doing, and I try to obviously with this with our approach, it's very clear. Law alone, lawsuits alone, litigation alone won't solve the problems. We're not here to heal the world and the problems of the world, and we don't even pretend it so. And that is already a significant difference to some litigators. I say some litigators who have this Tom Cruise attitude, like we come, appear in court, smile, and convince everybody in the courtroom, and then the sun is shining again, and the world is nice. That's definitely not the case. And so I was, we had been discussing a little bit with you, Camille, with Apita, with your students and others in early 2020 about the possibilities, the potential of litigation, or as we sometimes better try to call it, legal intervention, to focus or to point to the power critical attitude we try to develop in our work. And so, you know, this is a kind of reflection we have to do in any case, because if this makes sense, we cannot just file our funding applications and then bring those cases for which we are funded and then repeat it and repeat it as long as the funding allows it, and then leave it. And then meanwhile, trying to frame it as big success stories in our press releases, because the funders would like that, would like to hear success stories. And also, you know, it's the community, the human rights community is used to clap on their shoulders, and self-critique and critique, reflection is not really let's say the major characteristic you will find in this community, where everybody is, let's say, full of good motivation and full of inspiration. And so obviously you don't want to be the one who comes up with a conflict and saying, look, it's a bit problematic. So we have the problem that we have the litigators, and the litigators need to sell their work. The litigation organization need to sell their work to funders, to public audience. And on the other hand, we have this critique and a lot of valuable critique at the law faculties or the philosophical faculties of the university, where you have sometimes, let's say, a tendency to deconstruct everything, and then nothing is left. And so my
Wolfgang, let me stop you just for a moment, because you said so much there. I just want to, and especially some points that I think will really resonate with students. One of the points you made about strategic litigation, changing that terminology and opening it up. And I think from one of our first conversations after Peter and Cora Weiss's introduction, you and I talked about how alternatives to the practice of law through a singular channel. And I think that's really important, the multidisciplinary approach that ECCHR is undertaking, and that we are developing through our lab approach at the Sorensen Center. And much like CUNY Law, ECCHR believes strongly in close collaboration from the start with communities. So movement lawyering, or that close collaboration from the beginning. But one point that you made that I think is critically important is, with so many players involved, with the funding considerations, with the daunting kind of array of potential cases that could be brought, some of it has been opportunistic, and you've spoken about that. Can you talk a little bit about just how those priorities are made with you and your team?
Yeah, I mean, like you point to the category of so-called strategic human rights litigation, which is, you know, as all these one size fits all categories, it's very vague, and I am criticizing it for a number of reasons, and the two major reasons are, first of all, some of the major breakthroughs in human rights litigation are not at all strategic. And the European example, or the Americas example, is the Pinochet case. I mean, the arrest of former Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet in October 1998 in London was not at all a result of strategic considerations and of a strategic planning. No, it was completely opportunistic. It was opportunistic in the good old sense of the word. It became opportunistic is now a bad characteristic. Someone who calls someone an opportunist, and that's someone who has no principles. whereas opportunism in the Machiavellian sense is a technique, and as well as strategic is a technique. And so what I think is you have to understand that some of the major cases are not part of this, let's say, 3-year planning. Give us your theory of change and then write it down in your strategic planning, and then you get the funding exactly for that, and then you're completely in the tunnel and you're not aware of the fact that something might happen. When you're creative and when you're opportunistic, it means you exhaust the opportunity. That someone like Pinochet was traveling on a private ticket to London, and people from Latin America, the exiled Chilean community, the Spanish judge Baltasar Garzón, the lawyers in Spain, in Chile, and in the UK took the chance and let him arrest. And this was a major change. It was a major change in legal history, as well as the Alien Tort Claims Act litigation. You mentioned Peter Weiss and the Center for Constitutional Rights in the Filartiga case, where we had again a new concept, a new old concept was applied to a current situation. And if it was not by the smart lawyers who are aware of this, because I mean, like some of us, the human rights organizations, not to talk of the universities, became bureaucratic. We became bigger and bigger because we are trying to repeat so-called success stories, and I think that's the wrong take.
I'm glad you mentioned Filartiga, because that's a case we're very proud of, and the role that Rhonda Copeland, yes, who founded and directed the Gender Justice Clinic at CUNY Law, was very involved with Peter Weiss, and Cindy Suhu, who now directs the center with Lisa Davis, has joined us today. But I think that's a case that many students who are in that clinic, and maybe others at CUNY Law, are studying, and there are these glimmers of hope when you see these breakthroughs. But I'm thinking also of the endurance for this kind of thing. If you're looking at what it took to get you in Koblenz representing almost 100 Syrians and having that process go through, was that in like 2015, 16, before you then were in the German court litigating?
That's then the next thing I would have said. I mean, strategic, for example, in our cases, is not always filing a particular case, but for example, our whole approach to business and human rights, to restore accountability for economic actors, or even to establish the concept of accountability for economic actors, especially transnational corporations. That's an incredible important topic right now, and we started in the very beginning of ECCHR in 2008 to make it a program and to invest resources in that. And then we developed some strategic lines. We said we work on the working conditions along the global supply chains, and then we see what kind of cases will come out. And then a very significant case came out. But the strategic decision was, first of all, to work on business and human rights. Second, to develop a working line along exploitation in global supply chains. And I can tell you, in the conversation with the US litigators, or they would say, this is impossible. You can only litigate, the big disasters, when people are tortured or murdered or massacred. And we say, let's see what. And so this is also something, you can, as an organization or as a group, you can decide that you invest certain resources into some fields, and then something will come out. You can be sure that something will come out, because what we are doing is also we are socializing resources which are historically only available for the elites of the world. The lawyers, the legal knowledge was only accessible for the elites of the world. And what we're doing now is democratizing this knowledge and this access to justice. And obviously we can do it in every field of every single society, the German, the Europeans, the US, and not to talk of global southern society. And we can do it in every field also internationally. And so that's then a strategic decision. But the other thing, the other critique is also this concept of strategic litigation puts the focus too much on litigation within a certain the court proceeding, the legal proceeding. And I mean, the legal proceeding is incredibly important. There is no question about it. If we do it, we take it serious. So we try to develop a very serious professional legal knowledge. And that's tough. That's tough because it's a counter knowledge. It's not the kind of knowledge you get taught at the university. Nothing of what I'm doing I have learned at the university. Really nothing. You know, I had to swallow all this shitty, you know, legal knowledge they tried to teach me. I had to repeat it like an actor in the exams, and then at some point, sometimes earlier, we have to develop at the same time a radical critique of what we're learning, and also a pragmatic critique of not of the overall concept, but within the certain fields we have to see what does the law allow, and to counter the practice we're observing. And so this is only possible when we not only, let's say, put the focus on litigation, on what's happening in the court, but also outside the courts. So and you said nicely, it was nicely, we try to be interdisciplinary. We try to connect our legal cases with other activities. And for me, one of the most important examples of that work is our cooperation with London-based forensic architecture. You know, people who learn how to use forensic capacities also to research, to investigate this kind of human rights and ecological crime cases. And here we have someone with Eyal Weitzman, the head of forensic architecture, a philosopher, who points to the original concept of forensis, which goes back to the Roman forum. And the forum is the marketplace where important issues for the community, for the societies are discussed. And that's exactly it's a wonderful picture, because and this is an organization where we have now this new cooperation here in Berlin. It means you go to court, and with the highest, you know, professional standards of lawyers and of forensic experts for forensic architecture. But then, you know, we try to translate what we see, what we're doing in the court to an outside audience, and hopefully trying to put some new dynamics and new impulse into the scene. And then other actors come and discuss this and bring it to the attention of everybody in the forum. So that's why we say, you know, strategic litigation, yes, it is a right description of what we're doing, but it's too vague, and it doesn't really catch us what we want.
I love the much fuller picture that you're presenting, Wolfgang. And E.L. Weitzman, I think, is someone that some of our students could really learn from, as we have joint degree programs, you may be aware, and we have students coming from John Jay who've studied forensics, who bring that experience into law school and want to combine those fields. And we also have a joint degree with the Colin Powell School in International Affairs. I think there are a lot of interest there. In fact, after hearing you talk about your law program, it's too bad that CUNY Law didn't exist for you then. because you might be describing those studies in a more positive way, especially with scholars like you interacting with our students. But I want to come back to this collaborative effort in this space, because even your book now is on a site where there are feminist critiques invited and other voices coming in to talk about your concepts, and then you will respond to those. And that's clearly very important to you, the interactive, expanding space. And you provided some of your experience traveling around the world, which is particularly helpful for our students to read during times when travel is very limited, and about how those human connections helped build the work and the cases that you undertook. So my question is this: during COVID, now with some interaction limited, how are you seeing online forums filling that space? What is still missing from this interaction as you create these collaborative spaces, whether it's with artists or whether it's with forensic specialists? How are you able to do this in these times?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, myself, our organization, uh, all of us had to digest what happened in February, March last year. And so I think one of my, and I know, Camille, you agree with that, one of the most stupid so-called recommendations we received from those who govern us was social distancing. And I mean, like, yeah, there are some measures you have to undertake not to get infected. And so some physical distance might be necessary and helpful. But to call it social distancing, and our Chancellor Merkel, who is loved by everybody except some stupids like myself, was even saying it's helpful to minimize social contacts. And that's absolutely stupid. I mean, yes, we are also not those who are denying the dangers of Corona. But first of all, and I think that's Corona crystallized some of the problems in the world, and I try to touch upon this in my book. Corona is a result of multiple intersectional crises of this world. I mean, because you know, the cases, the rise of the cases in Bergamo, in Madrid, and even in parts of the US is due to the very, very bad state of the health system in our societies and worldwide. And I mean, we had people like Mike Davis from Los Angeles, who was saying 15 years ago, pandemics will come. Pandemics will come. First of all, how will they come? Because there is this encounter between people and nature, people and animal, and this is not, you know, it's our bad relation to the nature, which leads to more dangers, which opens a box of the Pandora. And second, he said 15, 18 years ago, he said, look, the right measure is we have to invest in the health system of the world. So not only in upstate New York or in the Upper West Side or in the nice Berlin neighborhoods, but everywhere in New York, everywhere in Berlin, everywhere else. And then, you know, we are safer, and we have to develop a so-called UN or World Health Organization agency which develops vaccines. And you know what didn't happen in the last 20 years. So it was not completely by surprise that a pandemic comes up, but we were not well equipped for it. And I mean, from then on, the social cost of this all was obviously completely unequal. I mean, like, you know, Camille, you and I, we have nice apartments, we have books, we have everything, we have, you know, and what about the people who are homeless? What about the refugees, the migrants? What about domestic violence and so on? I mean, you know the whole story. But I mean, it's so stupid to say we are all in the same boat. No, we're not all in the same boat. And the pandemic brought that to light again and again. And so I think that was for me one of the important lessons, that no matter, obviously it was a cut because we felt all over the world the same. It was a hit for all of us. And so climate change, for example, comes in small steps and are felt everywhere in different ways. Wars or attacks like 9/11 are felt in some places more than in others. And here we have something which hits us all in the same moment and globally. But it allows us.
So I'm
also,
sure this is resonating, Wolfgang. I just wanted to point out that your approach often talks about economic and social rights, which are too often left behind in the US. We often focus more on civil and political rights, and these inequities that we're seeing, as well as the xenophobia and the rising racism and all of that must be addressed. I heard something this morning that really resonated with me from Darnell Moore, an activist, who was saying, people are saying right now we've become too sensitive. And Darnell said, the real reason, what we should grapple with, is that we've been desensitized for too long. And now the stark realities are here. And so we do need these bolder strategies to address. And we do need to focus on economic and social rights. And I see that Kelly Folkers, one of our current Sorensen Center Fellows who's focused on global health, is here, and Jennifer Dorn as well. So I'm glad you spoke about the pandemic, because the Sorensen Center and ECCHR are holding meetings soon looking at global public good and what that means. And that ties very much into the corporate accountability issue that you mentioned earlier. So I want to make sure we have time for questions. There are terrific talent in the room. And I just want to make sure that we open it up now. Arpita's there and ready to call on anyone who would like to ask a question live and join our conversation. We would love it. Also, we have some questions that were submitted earlier that are really good on a range of topics. So let's try to get to as many as we can. So you can raise your hand and be called on. I saw Fatima's hand. I'm not sure of the order, but you could go ahead and call if you did, Arpita. Apologies if I'm going out of order.
Thank you so much. I want to start by thanking Arpita and Camille, of course, for putting this together, and Wolfgang for being here. And I guess my question is more twofold, and there isn't really a correct answer for this, of course, as there isn't for many of our questions. As someone who is interested, I think, in human rights litigation, what I'm most frustrated with is that within that framework, there is a huge white savior superiority complex that seems to operate, and I think evident of that is the fact that no politicians or military officers, or even states like the United States from the western part of the world are fixated at when we come to speak about human rights issues. We often think about the global south, but the biggest perpetuators of violence, at least for so many of us, have been countries like the United States, whether it's the invasion of Iraq, or as we come to see the impact of the invasion of Afghanistan, and European countries aiding the war in Yemen, and so on and so forth. So I guess my question is, how, as litigators, do we mitigate it? As litigators who want to work in the human rights area, how do we make sure that we're not reproducing what's already been so apparently toxic and damaging?
Shall I answer?
Great question. Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I mean, obviously, we are at ECCHR very much influenced by this critique of Twale, third world approaches towards international law, and the call for the decolonization of international law, as spelled out, for example, by Makao Mutwa and others. But we try to even, and I think that's the most important. Although this is the practice, although human rights, the concept of human rights is often instrumentalized, for example, by the U.S. government, calling their invasions humanitarian interventions, or telling us that they want to enforce democracy and rule of law in Afghanistan by bombing and drone attacks and torturing people. And that is then the lesson for the Afghans, and how successful that was we can observe these days. But there are counter practices. I mean, I think it's important to understand that we have to deal with human rights violations in you can call it global south, but we can also talk about Russia and China, and which is a very difficult field to litigate, because they have not even paid lip service to human rights and to the human rights discourse, and have not, many of these players have not even subscribed or to certain jurisdictions, like, for example, the International Criminal Court. So it is important to point to the human rights violation there. But I think our task as North America and Europe-based organization, we are absolutely privileged because we're safe, we're well equipped, well resourced. And so our task is to challenge powerful actors in our own countries and in our regions. And Fatima, there are groups who do this, for example, the Center for Constitutional Rights in New York, or us and others, like, let's say, Reprieve, for example. We are constantly suing cases against torture, against drone attacks, against war crimes of the West. You just mentioned Yemen. There is this pending case of us, of BCCHR, at the International Criminal Court, where the prosecutor's office, where we're trying to bring the European arms traders to court, because we say by exporting the arms to Saudi Arabia and others, they're firing the ongoing war in Yemen, and therefore they're adding and abetting war crimes. So so I think you have, and not to talk of all the interesting litigation which is happening within our society, because obviously we are focused very much on transnational issues, but you have very much going on in your own countries. But I think a part of this several pieces of litigation, it's also about decolonizing not only the law but also the practice of the law, and there is really much to do. But what I think is important is that's the law is part of the reality we're living in. And this is what I try to express with my concept of concrete utopia. We cannot wait until the law is decolonized. We cannot wait until we have the right, architecture of law. We have to deal with what we have. And this is what I'm trying to express. We take what we get within existing laws. We try to interpret it in a different way. We try to pave the way to get access for people and communities who haven't had access. But at the same time, we have to develop a utopian thinking. And when Camille pointed to it, growing inequality, exploitation, and so on, where we have not the right tools within the law. The tools to enforce economic and social rights are not as well elaborated as for civil and political rights. So at the same time, using concrete tools we have at the hand, but also think utopian. I think that's something, and being inspired by this decolonial perspective. I think that's important, but then also you can see Fatima, and that's from my point of view, that's an advantage of law. You know, I mean, I also tried to study a bit of philosophy or political science, but what are they doing when they finish studies? I mean, and what can we do? We can reach out to people, we can meet with people, we can meet with communities, and can start. We have practical tools others might not have had at hand after they finish their study, and that I found very attractive about law. Not I find.
Steve Rosenfeld, do you have a question?
Let me just unmute.
Okay.
Wolfgang, thank you for being the visiting Sorensen Scholar. I have been so excited to finally join a session with you. Camille knows I've been trying for as long as you've been associated with us, so thank you. My question has to do with the concept of universal jurisdiction, which you mentioned in the first article that was in the materials that were provided. You know, I went to law school, Columbia, more than 50 years ago, and I then litigated in the federal and state courts in the US for 40 years after that. And that's not a concept that I'm familiar with. And but we did learn in the first semester of law school, and then I litigated about it for a long time, the concepts of limited personal and subject matter jurisdiction, and personal jurisdiction even as being a part of due process. So I'm wondering what the concept of universal jurisdiction is and whether it's compatible with those concepts of limited personal and subject matter jurisdiction or not.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephen. I would say obviously it's just one additional legitimation for jurisdiction, and you can not everything what is happening under the roof of universal jurisdiction is pure universal jurisdiction. I would say in many of the cases we have personal jurisdiction. You know, if the perpetrator is a US general or a German businessman, you know, it's the principle of active personality. And obviously, due to this, you know, growing globalization processes, not only in business but everywhere, we have more and more personal jurisdiction, active personality, but also passive personality. I mean, several of the victims of the war on terror were citizens of many different countries. You know, one could frame it as universal jurisdiction, but one could as well work with the same concepts you learned 50 years ago at the law faculties. The step is only, you know, these are now cases that can be filed in courts in Europe and in North America. You know, our Kunduz case, the Afghanistan bombing case, was not based on universal jurisdiction. It was the German general who gave the order to bombard, you know, a civilian crowd. You could even argue that parts of the activities companies or military apparatus are carrying out is taking place here in Germany, in the US. So it's also the principle of territoriality invoked. But it didn't come up to us, the legal community, but also to us who would describe us as leftist or progressive or whatever, that these are cases which can be brought to court in our countries. And I think that's the new step. That's in fact the new step. Obviously, yes, then there are also some arguments and legitimation for universal jurisdiction, because it's a kind of extension of the Nuremberg principles developed already in the late 40s, where, you know, the world community said these are crimes, the crimes against humanity, which are not the domain of the national state, but which are not only committed against the communities which are slaughtered and massacred, but against the mankind itself, the humankind itself. And therefore, everybody can step in. In the best case, it's local and regional courts who are taking the cases, like for example in Syria, our Syria cases. The second option would be a regional or an international court. As you know, in the Syria case, this does not happen. And then another option is then universal jurisdiction. And we can discuss a lot what's going on in the Syria cases, but we have nearly 1 million Syrians living in Germany, so it's also an issue of this part of the German society to bring these cases. So there, I think it's not so much the purely legal development, but it's in a way it's globalization from below. You know, the globalization was driven by the military, by the secret services, by the corporations, by economy, and they made their own rules, and they were always in favor, and there was always completely lack of accountability and a lack of access to justice. And we're trying to counter that with any argument, may it be universal jurisdiction, may it be other principles.
Thank you, Steve and Fatima, and of course, Wolfgang, for your responses. Are there other questions from those currently in the room? We welcome them. Alex. Thank you, Alex. You can unmute.
Thank you. I was wondering about, because as Mr. Wolfgang said, about the international jurisdiction, how would that affect the country's sovereignty? And like, how could a country react to this jurisdiction as it would be like international? So that would like national sovereignty count in this case?
It's a very important question. It's a question often raised exactly in the context of universal jurisdiction. You know, is the arrest of Augusto Pinochet in London, is it violating the sovereignty of the Chilean state? It's obviously it's affecting states' sovereignty, but it's well funded. I mean, in a world where military interventions are still usual, where nobody cares about the violations of sovereignty through decisions of economic actors. I mean, like the whole world trade system, the whole world economic system is an ongoing violations of the sovereignty of communities and states worldwide. Nobody talks about that. But when it comes to accountability, the same people would say, this is a violation of sovereignty. Or they would even say, we have to accept, the different culture of human rights in, let's say, African countries, as murder and rape and exploitation is not in the same way, scandalized in African countries as the African people haven't subscribed to these principles. No, I think it's important because obviously what we are doing as, let's say, human rights groups, human rights litigation is one thing, but we also have to be aware that we can open the Pandora's box. And so if we argue for the complete, for jurisdiction for everything, everywhere, against everybody, we have to be aware this is a concept that can be used by more powerful people to, in fact, really violate sovereignty of states. And I think that's therefore we have the obligation to be extremely careful with our legal arguments. And we have to, for example, I give you one example, we don't use the concept of terrorism. because this is in our eyes, it's not a concept, it's not a legal concept, it's a political concept. Yeah, and so we don't even use it to try to pursue cases against state torturers or organized murder by states. We try to work with the human rights framework because we think that prevents us from being instrumentalized. And so in the same way, when you also see how important the establishment of sovereignty was then for the decolonized countries, for the new, who just gained their independence in the 50s and the 60s, you have to be aware of it, and you have to reflect it. And therefore, your arguments have to be very principled and very strong, and not superficial, and not just choosing whatever argument of the wide toolbox, but really reflecting the not envisaged dangers of so important what you say, and we have to be always aware of it. But still, I would say the kind of litigation against corporations and torturers are well funded and legitimated.
While we're waiting to see if others have questions, I just want to jump in with, I know we have a number of Sorensen Center Fellows and CUNY Law students who are addressing immigration issues, refugee issues, asylum seekers, and particularly now with looking at Afghan people at risk. And this morning we've had a number of online meetings and discussions about how we can be of assistance during this time. And I just wanted to come back to something that you talked about earlier, Wolfgang, which is, and this relates to Fatima's question, this urge to protect these colonial enclaves and the xenophobia and the border issue. I mean, one of our Sorensen Center Advisory Board meeting members, Gay McDougall, who serves on the Committee to Eliminate Racial Discrimination, CERD, has spoken to our community about how wherever she travels for these meetings, there are communities who say, we do not want immigrants in. We want to stop this flow. And that her committee is doing all they can to try to educate, to talk with leadership. But we're certainly seeing this in the US, while there are some amazing efforts by organizations like the IRC and IRAP and a number of even student initiatives to help with just the pressing needs there. So I wanted to ask you, because I think ECCHR is undertaking some fascinating work with this collaboration, with this forensic organization, to look at these deaths at sea and these migrant flows. And I think that could really be of interest to our community. Would you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it goes in the direction of Fatima's question. I mean, let's look at our own backyard, and yeah, Europe's backyard were the external borders, was the Mediterranean, and even we have this colonial enclaves on the African continent, Ceuta and Melilla, which still belong to Spain, where many human rights violations took place. And so what we are saying is, the probe for the seriousness, the proof for the seriousness of, European actors, the Peace Nobel Prize winner, European Union, is then how they deal with, the most vulnerable people and communities under their own jurisdiction. And if this is the proof, we definitely failed. Europe failed. Europe is, and I mean, obviously Europe always failed because of the colonialism. I mean, like, how can you ever frame European history as a history of progress, developing democracy and open society and whatsoever, without in the same sentence mentioning the externalization of cost through the colonial experiences. But as for now, I think the handling of migration and the handling of migrants is a probe for all of us, because if we allow them to deal with the most vulnerable group like this, the concept of law, the concept of human right is about to fail. Because I mean, if you're not willing and able to enforce rights in that particular situation, and that's going on in Europe right now, it's that they would even question the concept of law, because they would say, you know, we cannot grant human rights to everybody, because it's politically dangerous to allow more migrants to come and to try even to grant them a fair legal procedure. So I think serious human rights groups of a certain size have to deal with migration issues, have to deal with the border situation. Again, what Fatima but also Alex were saying, it's dangerous if human rights organizations of a certain size only deal with the crimes of the, you know, barbarian global southern, you know, perpetrators. That's dangerous, and we shouldn't allow them. And therefore, obviously, we have to put resources. We have to establish groups who go there and bring this also into the mind of the human rights mainstream.
I wish we didn't have a cutoff. You can see, Wolfgang, from just the chat and the comments that were made earlier, that time with you is so valuable. We always learn so much and admire the work you're doing. And we hope that we can see you again soon in our virtual center, but also, as you said at the start, in person. That's what we're looking forward to, your return. So be well. And we look forward to the next.
I think I even look more forward to that than you.
Take care, and thank you all.